All right, so ready to dive in. Today, we're looking at February 6th, 2025. And wow, there's a lot to unpack. My news feed this morning, it was just flooded. Everything from like Trump administration stuff to some pretty wild tech advancements.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's definitely a lot to process. Sometimes it feels like drinking from a fire hose.
Totally. And that's why we do this, right? Break it all down. So how about we start with, well, the Trump administration's been busy. This USAID thing, cutting staff down to, what, less than 300 people? That's a pretty major move.
It's huge and makes you wonder about, well, their priorities, right? Especially since Ukraine, they've been the biggest recipient of USA food aid lately.
Yeah, with everything going on over there, it makes you think. Plus, then there's this news about potential firings at health agencies, too. Seems like a lot of upheaval.
It's definitely a pattern, and not everyone's just sitting back. You've got Attorney General Pam Bondi. She's ordered a review of all the Trump prosecutions. And in New York, Letitia James is getting ready to sue the administration.
It's like a power struggle playing out in real time. And on top of all that, we've got executive orders about the International Criminal Court, this whole anti-Christian bias thing, and then Kash Patel is the FBI director nominee. Talk about a controversial pick.
Especially with his stance on those FBI agents, the ones from the Trump investigations. Just adds fuel to the fire, doesn't it?
For sure. Okay, maybe we need a break from all that. Let's talk tech for a minute. Samsung's going big, launching the Galaxy S25 globally. The Enterprise Edition, you could already pre-order it in Europe.
Trying to get ahead of the game, it seems. But Apple's not just watching. Rumors of an iPhone SE4 announcement any day now. Plus, did you see that thing about their researchers working on robots, including one that's like a friendly table lamp?
Sounds straight out of science fiction. And speaking of the future, AI is getting massive investments. Amazon's putting in like $100 billion this year alone. Crazy, right?
They're calling it a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. That kind of money, it feels like they're going all in, trying to reshape everything. What do you think that means for the rest of the tech world? Are we going to see everyone scrambling to keep up?
That's the big question, isn't it? Feels like a turning point. And then there's OpenAI's Stargate project, looking for data centers here in the U.S. I wonder if that ties into the Trump administration's AI interest, too. Oh, and ChatGPT's got a Super Bowl ad, which is pretty wild.
Yeah.
It's like AI is officially mainstream now.
Not just for the tech nerds anymore, huh? It's everywhere you look, even the Super Bowl.
Okay, so we've covered politics and tech. How about some money talk? Amazon's Q4 earnings came out. They beat expectations, which is impressive. But their cloud revenue was lower than predicted, and that caused their stock to dip. Even Amazon's not untouchable, I guess.
True, but even with that, they're still likely to overtake Walmart as the top company on the S&P 500. Their growth is still pretty amazing. Do you think this cloud revenue thing might make them invest even more in AI, though? Like, double down?
Good point. Definitely adds a new wrinkle to their strategy. But then on the other hand, you've got the Bank of England. They cut rates, and they're talking about inflation and trade wars being risky, not exactly painting a rosy picture of the global economy.
It's a lot of uncertainty, that's for sure. Makes you wonder how much of it is because of, well, Trump's policies and how they affect global trade. What do you think? Is he a big part of this economic instability?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, look at Canada. They're going towards resource nationalism because of the tariff threats. Pretty clear example of those policies in action.
Definitely shows how interconnected everything is. One country does something, and it sets off a chain reaction.
Right, and then there's the EV market. Sales are booming, but car companies are actually losing money on them. It's like this weird contrast.
Yeah. People want EVs, they're worried about the environment and excited about the technology, but the companies making them, they're struggling to make it work financially. Especially with all the policy stuff around climate change and energy, a lot of that's shaped by, well, Trump and his administration. What do you think this means for EVs long term? Can they overcome these hurdles and really change things, or will it all fizzle out?
I don't know. That's the big mystery. We'll have to see how it plays out. Okay, so we've talked about a lot here. What are your initial thoughts? Do you see any connections between all these different stories, or is it just chaos?
The thing that stands out to me is this feeling of tension. Like a push and pull between all these different forces. We see it in the legal fights against the Trump administration, in the economic stuff with trade wars, even in the tech world where innovation often has a price.
Yeah, I see that too. Like we're all caught in this tug of war, both within different parts of society and between them.
Exactly. And it makes you think, how do we deal with that tension? Can we use it to make positive changes? And how do we even make sense of it all without getting totally overwhelmed?
Those are tough questions, and I don't pretend to have the answers. But that's part of why we do this, right? We're all trying to figure this out together. I think the best we can do is stay informed, keep talking about these things, and try to see the bigger picture.
I agree. It's about staying curious, always learning.
Well said. All right, let's take a quick break and come back for part 2. We'll get into some more specific examples of these themes, from social issues to how this federal funding freeze is going to affect things. Stay with us.
Welcome back. It's kind of wild how all these stories, they're all connected, Makes you realize just how complex everything is.
Totally. There's always more going on than those quick headlines let on. So let's dig in a bit deeper, shall we? Where do we start?
One that really stood out to me was the NCAA banning transgender women from women's sports. And it comes right after Trump's executive order about the same thing.
Yeah, that's a big one. Seems like this is becoming a much bigger issue, and the NCAA's decision, it's going to cause even more debate, don't you think? What's your take? Is this a setback for transgender rights, or is it about making competition fair?
It's tough. So many strong opinions on both sides. You've got people saying it's about inclusion, letting transgender women compete based on how they identify, but then others worry about fairness, potential biological advantages and all that. It really gets at this whole ongoing struggle for LGBTQ plus rights. Society is still trying to figure out these issues of gender identity and expression. It's not simple.
Definitely seems like a conversation we need to have, carefully and thoughtfully. And it makes you think about the government's role in all this, too.
Yeah.
Should it be up to groups like the NCAA to decide, or should there be laws about who can play sports based on gender identity?
Really good question. And it goes back to what we were talking about before, that whole idea of government power, right?
Right.
Where's the line between individual rights and the government stepping in? It's a slippery slope. But we need to figure it out as a society.
Absolutely. Okay, switching gears a bit. What about this federal funding freeze? Community health and Head Start programs, they're going to be hit hard, right?
Yeah, that's a worry. Those programs, they help people who really need it, families with low incomes, kids, people who rely on them for healthcare, education, basic support.
Yeah.
Cutting their funding could be devastating.
It's hard to think about, and you have to wonder, when these big policy changes happen, what are the unintended consequences? It feels like we're always trying to balance things, smaller government, less spending, but also making sure people who need help get it. It's a tough juggling act.
No doubt. And it comes back to us, how do we respond? How do we make sure our voices are heard so we get policies that support everyone? How do we find that balance? What do you think?
Honestly, I struggle with that myself sometimes. There's so much going on, it's hard to know where to even start. But I guess it starts with staying informed, being part of these conversations, and realizing that each of us has a part to play in making things more fair and just.
I think you're right. Being active citizens, not just watching from the sidelines. Voting, talking to our representatives, organizing in our communities. What else do you think people can do to get involved, make a real difference?
For me, I think it's also about connecting with people who see things differently than we do, having those hard conversations, trying to understand where they're coming from. It's easy to stay in our own little bubbles, but real change happens when we step outside of that and talk to people who disagree with us.
Love that. Building bridges, not walls, as they say. And sometimes it's about finding a bit of humor, a little lightness in the middle of all this, too. Speaking of which, remember that story about Apple's friendly table lamp robot?
Oh, yeah. I totally saw that. All these robot prototypes they're working on, and then there's this one that's like a cute little lamp, not the scary take-over-the-world robots you see in movies.
Right. It's kind of refreshing, actually. All this tech stuff advancing so fast, and then you've got this thing that's just fun. Makes you wonder if maybe the future won't be all doom and gloom. Maybe there's room for innovation and a sense of playfulness. Technologies that do cool stuff, but also, bring a little joy into our lives.
I love that way of looking at it. Good reminder that even with all the craziness and uncertainty, there's still good stuff out there. And sometimes it's those little things, those unexpected creative bursts that keep us going.
Absolutely. So how about we take a minute to appreciate those little sparks of joy and then come back for the last part of our deep dive. We'll get into some of the interesting financial stuff happening, like those Amazon earnings and the Bank of England's rate cut.
Sounds like a plan. See you in a bit. All right, last leg of our deep dive here. Let's talk money. We were discussing Amazon's earnings before. Seems like they're still on track to be #1 on that S&P 500 list, even with their cloud stuff dipping.
It's interesting. I mean, beating expectations overall, that's not easy. But the cloud revenue thing, it shows that Even a giant like Amazon, they're not immune to pressure.
Makes you wonder if this will make them kind of go all in on AI even more, you know?
Yeah.
Like, got to stay ahead of the game.
Could be. They're big on long-term plans and taking risks, that's for sure. Wouldn't be surprised if they see this as a chance to innovate, find new ways to be on top.
Always thinking a few steps ahead, like a chess game. Speaking of big moves, what about the Bank of England cutting rates? That seemed like a pretty big deal.
Yeah, it definitely got people talking, especially with them warning about inflation and those trade war risks. Makes the global economy seem a little shaky, doesn't it?
A bit. Makes you wonder if this is just the start. Could we be heading towards a global recession, do you think?
It's hard to say for sure. So many factors at play, right? Trade tensions, this rise of nationalism, all the tech changes happening so fast, a lot of volatility. Tough to predict what'll happen.
Yeah, it's all connected, that's for sure. What happens in one place affects everyone. Like that thing with Canada going towards resource nationalism because of the tariffs. Yeah. Shows how those America First policies have ripple effects.
Exactly. And it's not just trade either. Look at tech. EV sales are through the roof, but car companies are losing money on them. Kind of a paradox, isn't it?
It is. People love the EVs, worried about the planet, excited about the tech, but actually making them affordable, that's a challenge for those companies.
Shows how what people want and what's happening in the market, they don't always line up. It'll be interesting to see what happens with EVs long term. Will they really change things, or is it too much of an uphill battle?
Another one of those big questions we can't answer just yet. Well, we've covered a lot today, haven't we? Politics, tech, the global economy, all over the place.
And it's amazing how it's all connected in the end. So much to learn and think about, always something new to explore.
That's the truth. So, to everyone listening, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into February 6th, 2025. Hope it gave you some things to think about, helped you see how it all fits together, maybe even sparked your curiosity to keep digging into these topics.
Don't forget, staying informed is a journey, not a destination. The world's always changing, so keep those questions coming, keep learning, and keep looking at things from different angles.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Until next time, keep exploring.